Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, here we are.
Okay.
I think we're all together now. All right,
Yeah.
thank you. So this is our 6th roundtable. We've actually been doing this for 6 months now. So
Wow.
thank you all for being part of this roundtable exploring womb technology and womb wisdom. So today we have invited Marcine Quenzer, who is a real expert, I feel, and a lot of people feel, on Jigonsaseh, who is one of the members of the Peacemaker group, the Haudenosaunee Peacemaker group from about 1,000 years ago. And the reason this is so important to us and our womb explorations is because 3 of the women in this group of 5 were, we believe, parthenogenic, and 2 were the virgin birth mothers, and then there was the Mother of Nations, who was a huge influence on the mission of peace. So I just wanted to also mention that what was really amazing is that I was asked by the Mohawks, because I live here on within a 20-mile radius of where the Peacemaker group formed and where Haudenosaunee was born. And so I'm sure this is inspiring, this work. And so being my neighbors, the Mohawk Nation here, just 5 minutes down the road, actually I am on the former hunting grounds. They asked me, because I am an artist, and I was a mural artist. I just retired 2 years ago. And they asked me to paint the whole epic story of the Peacemaker in their school, like down the hall. It was like a storyboard, and so many questions came up for me that the Mohawks weren't able to answer, because each of the 5 or 6 nations each have their own version and have more details depending on where they're situated. And so I started looking beyond the Mohawks for parts of the story that seemed to be missing, and Jigonsaseh was one. And so I think, Marcine, we met on Facebook in about 2014 or 13. And yeah, and there's one of Marcine's paintings right behind her.
Wow, beautiful.
Oh,
You made that, Marcine?
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And so Marcine was really generous in sharing with me about Jigonsaseh. She also gave me the names of the 2 mothers, which I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Geherusug and Gehiliogaha. And so anyway, we continued to communicate, but this is a nice reconnection here tonight. So we are excited to hear some more details of this amazing Jigonsaseh and her lineage back to Sky Woman, you say. And so, okay, I'm going to let you go ahead and share, please.
Okay. Well, lots of things going through my head here while you're talking. I think it's really important how I got my story. I met an Oneida elder and eventually married him, and found out after we moved to Oklahoma that he was the medicine man for the Seneca Cayugas in Oklahoma. And he had spent many, many falls and seasons sitting at the feet of the speaker and the medicine people that were ahead of the ceremonies. Dutch White Wing and Bob Ruby and no, excuse me, it's Bob White Wing and Dutch Ruby and Bob. Anyway, I think I'm getting flustered. Anyway, he had sat and listened to their stories and had spent many, many hours with them. And this is really kind of significant because at that time, he was one of the few that did this. So he started picking up pieces of medicine and pieces of stories that the other people didn't get. Now, later on, when it came time for him to become speaker, he refused the position. And so it went to another young man, Richard White. And Richard did the very best he could. But Richard had spent most of his time drinking. And so there was an awful lot of stuff that he didn't remember, couldn't remember, because he wasn't in the right place at the right time. So you have to understand there are at least 14 reservations of the Haudenosaunee. The ones that Oklahoma went there in 1830. And they chose to go there because at that time, there was the Christian missionaries coming in, having a really strong influence on everything. In fact, you can even see it in the stories. But also Handsome Lake had come out with his new religion. And the people of Oklahoma didn't want anything to do with either one of them. They wanted to follow the peacemaker's path, what the peacemaker had given to them. So they left their country, they left all the people that they knew and loved and went to Oklahoma, where they started out fresh, trying to keep the old ways. Now it's very interesting also because this is an area where there is the Seneca Cayugas, but the Wyandats are right there in the same area also. And the Peacemaker and Jigonsaseh were both from Wyandotte nations. So here's the Wyandats. In fact, the speaker for the Seneca Cayuga was also Wyandotte. He married a Seneca woman, so his children are considered Seneca. So we have this situation where in 14 reservations, 13 of them actually got to the point where they stopped white people from coming to the ceremonies. They won't let you. In fact, when I was up at Six Nations, I did get to go to a ceremony, but I wasn't supposed to be there. I got invited and kind of snuck in. But I wasn't supposed to be there because white people are not allowed at any of their ceremonies and are not allowed to live on the reservations. But down there in Oklahoma, because they were following the Peacemaker's path, they still had an open, anybody could come. When they do their green corn, the whole community, the whole area is invited to come in and participate. Now in the story, it tells about how Jigonsaseh held the Soldiers' Lodge, the Visitors' Lodge. It was a special place where visitors came and they would be fed, they'd find a place to sleep. Anything that they were needed was supplied by Jigonsaseh and her clan mothers. Well, down in Oklahoma, up until just a few years ago, they had a visitors' camp. It was held by Grandma Mandy. And it was right smack dab in the center. Everything outside the rocks was everybody else's camps, but inside the rocks that circled the grounds down there, Grandma Mandy's was the only camp that was allowed in because she was the welcoming camp. And every Wednesday night, she would make donuts for everybody. It was just really, really special. But when she passed away, they passed the camp to her grandson. And so it's no longer with the woman in charge of the camp.
So can I ask, can I interrupt for a sec? Like,
Sure.
Can you tell us more about how, what this is all about of the camp wherever anyone can stay? How is that connected with Jigonsaseh?
Okay, yes, I would love to. In Jigonsaseh's time, her village was on the warpaths, but actually it wasn't just warpaths, it was ancient buffalo trails that had worn down into the ground to where that even when the buffalo were no longer there, these paths were used for travel. Her lodge was put at the intersection of the east and west and the north and south buffalo trails, which they call the paths of war. During her time, she was part of the neutral nation. They were called neutrals because they made peace treaties with all the other nations so that they could live in relatively peace. However, the warring nations would have to come right through this intersection to go north or to go south or to go east or to go west in order to wage war. So her camp there, part of the treaty that she negotiated with these warring nations was that, yes, they can come through her lands, they can come through there, but they had to obey the peace. They couldn't start trouble. They couldn't war. And in return, she would make sure they had safe passage and they would have food and they would have whatever else they needed to rest, recuperate until they continued their journey on into other lands. And so this is a very, very ancient camp that went back 1,000 years. And the only shred of it that was left was Grandma's camp, because none of the other nations do this.
No.
Did Jigonsaseh start the camp, or was it in a lineage before her?
That's a good question too, because nothing really says. But
Okay.
if you use your cognitive mind and your thinking mind, Eli Parker says that she is the last living descendant of Sky Woman. In order to be the last living descendant of Sky Woman, it had to be a mother-daughter, mother-daughter, mother-daughter transition all the way down to Jigonsaseh, which means her mother was a Jigonsaseh, her grandmother was a Jigonsaseh, her great-grandmother was a Jigonsaseh, all the way back to Sky Woman. Now, this is interesting because in our today's stories, due mostly, I think, to probably the missionary work, they only tell about the good twin and the bad twin. They totally dropped the two women twins because there were two women that were also born.
Going back to
At
the
the same
Sky
time.
Woman story.
Going back to the Sky Woman story. Yes, when she landed on Earth 3 days after she was, no, not Sky Woman. She gave birth to long-tail fat-faced lynx. But when Lynx and North Wind got together, the story that has come down to us tells us about Sapling and Flint, Hiwanya and Kanaya, and they totally have obliterated the part of the two women. Now, from Barbara Mann, you find out that the two women's names were Blue Lynx, which obviously would be the lynx that everybody else is descended from, and Sweet Cornflower. And each one of them become guardians of the four directions. And that's a whole nother subject all in its own. But it becomes what's called a twinship principle, or the principle of balance. Everything has to have balance. Just like night and dark, light and dark have to have balance, night and day, everything that you can think of. One of the things that I listened to you guys on was talking about the darkness and how the darkness, the inner darkness, plays a very important part in growth and elevating our own spirituality. So it is with the West. The West is this darkness. And so this twinship principle means balance, male, female, balance. Everything is balanced.
But
And
did you
when
say
it's
there were
not
four?
balanced, pardon?
Did you say there were 4 twins or 2?
Yes.
Okay.
No, there are
No.
4. There are the 2 boys
Oh, I
that
see.
are Sapling and Flint.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
there are the 2 girls that are Blue Lynx
I
and
get it.
Cornflower,
Okay.
Sweet Cornflower. So there are the 4 of them. Now in that, Sapling takes the east, which brings enlightenment. Cornflower takes the south, which brings abundance. Flint takes the west, which is healing and introspection, healing within. And Blue Lynx takes the north. And she kind of took the attitude of tough love. these humans get themselves into problems, they need to just get themselves out of it type of attitude. And of course, you know that winter is not a kindness. If you go into winter unprepared, you're going to suffer greatly. And so this is kind of her addition to everything, where Sweet Cornflower, she was just the opposite. She was anything humanity needed. She was ready to grow it, sprout it, help them out, make it comfortable, make it warm, provide for them. And so you find the different archetypes within those four individuals. Now, what is also interesting, okay, I made the link here of why my going to Oklahoma to get this story was so important. And I need to probably tell you that Jack found me in Boise, Idaho. He'd gotten in trouble with the law, and he was on the witness protection program. But that's what it took for him to find me in Idaho so that I could go to Oklahoma and learn all these things. And so Jack kept telling me that the Haudenosaunee, the women are the power, the women are the power, and other little things that he would tell me about. That when I started hearing the stories, I got to do 2 tours in the summer up in New York. And while I was up there, I was hearing the stories of what they were saying about Jigonsaseh. And I'm saying, good grief, this does not match with what Jack was telling me. And so that was part of what spurred me to get into looking and finding out what I could find out, because he said she was powerful. And that's not what I was hearing up there. And of course, if she was a Jigonsaseh, she had been trained from birth. She'd been down-fended, just like Sky Woman had been down-fended in Sky World. Do you know what down-fended is?
No.
Okay, down-fended is when very select individuals who have a great deal of spiritual abilities is separated from the rest of the tribe, so that they can be taught by elders in medicine and all the special ways of the sacred ways of the Haudenosaunee. And when they do this, they lay cattail down around the encampment so that if anybody comes or goes, they disturb cattail down, and then somebody knows that someone has left or somebody has come. So our Jigonsaseh from the Peacemaker's time was down-fended also. And she was taught all these things that came down from the very first Jigonsaseh.
Wow.
So she was a very wise woman. She was a very talented woman. It is said that she was born with a caul on her face. This is something else that, if you are familiar with, it denotes high spiritual abilities. Stories of her being able to retrieve information from among the stars or from the plants or just wherever the information may have been kept. One of her nicknames was Star Heels. And this was because she had the polished qualog shells carved and sewn onto the cuffs of her moccasins, so that when she walked, the sun would catch them and it would glitter. She also wore a cape that was covered with freshwater pearls. This is how they think they may have found her grave up there by Ganondagan, is because they found a grave that was filled with all these pearls.
Wow. And that's near
So,
Lake Erie, isn't it? Is that near
Pardon?
Lake Erie? Didn't you say Lake Erie
Yes.
was the name of the lake?
Yes. Well, this was
What lake was that again, Marcine?
Erie.
Lake Erie. Okay.
Yeah, Erie means cat.
Cat?
Erie means cat.
Cat.
And
Okay.
so that became one of the names for her and her people, the cat people.
The cat people. Oh,
And
that's
she was
interesting.
known as the cat as well,
Oh, okay.
because Jigonsaseh means wildcat or
Okay.
lynx.
Right.
Oh, I see.
It's so interesting. My
Hmm.
grandfather had a lynx head on the wall when I was growing up.
Yes, yes. And lynxes were sacred. You would never, ever have a Haudenosaunee hunt or kill a lynx. Never. They would expect swift and quick retribution if they were to do something like that.
Wow.
So let me see. We're not following any storyline. This is more like just a discussion. So
Sure, that's okay.
So anyway, Jack in that situation found me in Idaho, took me to Oklahoma, where I got to spend 10 years with the Haudenosaunee down there, which was absolutely the most marvelous, remarkable time of my life. And I miss it desperately.
Mm.
The comradeship, I mean, they just took me in and made me one of them. I served at ceremonies. I served at their dinners. I was just part of them. And of course, Grandma Mandy was my grandma.
Mm.
So I had her to help with an awful lot of things too.
Can I ask a question?
Question?
Yeah, because you said that, I think you said in the book that the last Jigonsaseh, there was a last one for some
Yes.
reason. Why was there a last one? Why didn't the tradition continue?
The tradition continued, but not through the lineage of Sky Woman. She never had any children, near as I can tell.
Oh, I see.
But
Okay.
there were others that could trace their lineage back that may have had a man in between there instead of straight women.
Okay.
And
But
so there were others that could then claim it. But she was the very last one to be mother, daughter, mother, daughter, mother, daughter, back to Blue Lynx.
Yes,
oh,
because
Jigonsaseh was. I see. Jigonsaseh didn't have children, right?
Yes.
But today,
go
yeah.
ahead.
Well, the tradition has also stopped in today's time as well. Is that right?
Yes. Eli Parker, 1830, his sister Caroline was the very last Jigonsaseh of the Haudenosaunee, which is also another reason why I think that Eli had very solid information in the stuff that he said and was written about him in his autobiography. His sister had signed several of the first treaties because, you know, the treaties were no good without the Jigonsaseh signature.
Wow.
And so the first couple of treaties they made with the white man, but then, you know, the white man got devious and they started just getting anyone that they could get, give them a beer or whatever, you know, and they got people signing these treaties that had no right to sign the treaties. But if you look at a couple of the very earliest ones, she signed them. She's on there.
Wow.
I'm thinking this could be be part of the virgin birth lineage, possibly.
Well,
Or
we've got a couple. The Peacemaker, of course. The story is that he was born of a virgin. And in the creation story, we've got births that are rather dubious. I mean, they qualify it with certain things like Sky Woman, the first lynx, her father was Sky Chief, but she was fathered by his breath.
Right.
And then
that's parthenogenesis.
yeah. And then when Lynx has children, that again is fathered by the breath or through some magic, not through any actual physical contact.
Right.
And then, of course, when we get down to the Peacemaker's time, the Peacemaker is the one that is born through the virgin lineage. So yeah, they have some stories in there.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful these have been kept alive and that you're keeping them alive. And I want to say too that I think it's really wonderful that you were married in and then adopted in, so you were really trusted with all this with
Yes.
this information.
I
How-
feel I was really fortunate.
Yeah.
I have my art ability. And when I was in New York, traveling through New York, and we were doing the Onondaga Peace Festival that David Yarrow had orchestrated. And I got to talk to people up there, and I found them all very open, very welcoming, very, very caring, all except the Onondaga clan mothers.
Ah,
And the stories and the help that I got, it's like in my book, I include 10 of the creation stories. The creation itself is a whole epic. I mean, if you were going to make a movie, you'd need 2 hours to do it. So the 10 stories that I picked out are just the 10 that I felt laid out the foundation for Haudenosaunee world thought.
mhm.
And I got that from some elders up at Six Nations. And I feel, you know, inside of it, he wrote, he says, we thought you were just one of those wannabes. But he says, he says, you're the real deal. Here, have this book. And I'm going, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, you know. What else can I tell you about all of that?
10 stories. What 10 stories are these? Have you written them or written them
Yeah,
down?
they're in my book.
Okay.
The first 10 stories are stories of the creation, which tells about Sky Woman coming from Sky World and her giving birth to long-tail fat-faced lynx, fat-tail lynx, fat-faced long-tail lynx having met North Wind and giving birth to those 4 children, and then the parts that each one of the children took in creating and finishing the creation of the earth. The other thing that you'll notice in these creation stories is everybody has a part in it. There isn't just one creator that poofs it into existence. It's everybody. The earth plays a part. Sky World plays a part. Each one of the twins plays a part. Everybody has something. The animals, in fact, help to
Right.
create the earth too. And during this
Love it.
time, the animals can talk just like we converse right now. It wasn't until after this creation bit that the language was changed. And then again, it was because man changed it. Man quit listening. They're still talking, but you have to be able to hear it. You've got to listen. You've got to take the time to listen. And then it starts in with the birth of the peacemaker.
Yeah. Can you?
And follows on down to where he meets Jigonsaseh. And there's some very stark differences here because you've been told that there was famine. The people were so hungry that they were eating each other, and that they were so poor, they were just starving to death inside their stockades. They were too frightened to leave. And Peacemaker comes into Jigonsaseh's country, which is down around Niagara Falls, in through that area along Lake Erie. And he's seeing fields and fields and fields of corn and gardens and orchards. And he's looking at this and he's saying, these people aren't starving. How can they do this with the wars that are going on? How can they do this? And so he makes up his mind, he's got to find out how this is done. And so he sits beside the trail on a path that leads to one of her villages. And as he sits there, he takes out his cross sticks and he makes a little fire. And he sits there and he waits to be invited in. After a while, the clan mothers and clan fathers come out to see what in the world is he doing out here. They come out. He says, I have something I want to tell you. And so they end up inviting him in and listening to the words that he has. But here he is, he's a stranger. He doesn't look like anybody that they know. Nobody.
Mm.
And so it is with a great deal of, what would you call it? The word has escaped me right quick.
Reservation.
When you don't, reservation, that's a good one, that will work. That they even invite him in and listen to him. That it is here in Jigonsaseh's village, he's brought in, he's led right to her door. And when he comes in, he is a very enlightened soul. Now, Jigonsaseh, with her gifts and her spiritual abilities, had a great big log that was carved, and it looked like a turtle, but the inside of it had been hollowed out by fire so that it had a very black finish. And when you poured water in it and the water became still, it would give her visions. She had already seen the coming of a young man who had an aura, a glow around him that was so effervescent that she could feel it. And so when this young man comes in, she recognized him from her vision, but he recognizes her. He says, Jigonsaseh, Jigonsaseh,
Oh.
you are my mother. And what he's referring to is she was Lynx in the creation story, his cosmic mother.
Hmm.
And she was Sapling. So the Seneca believe in reincarnation. So here we have Lynx, and she is the reincarnated mother of all Ongweho, all of them. And so later in the story, when he gives to her the name Mother of Nations, it's got multiple layers within that name. Sure, she mothered the 5 nations into the Confederacy. And I will skip to that part of the story here to share that with you, because I know that's not in the book yet. And so as she mothered all the nations into this Confederacy, she again earned this position of mother. And perhaps that's why she didn't have children in this lifetime, because she didn't have any time for her own children. And then also it referred to the fact that she was literally the mother of all Ongweho, all of them from the beginning of time. Now, as her and the Peacemaker and Hiawatha, the 3 of them joined together to start going to the different nations, Eli Parker says they traveled together. And so as they would travel into the different countries, first they went to the Mohawk. And when Sapling was in, when the Peacemaker was invited in to the Mohawk village, he had to prove who he was. But they eventually do take hold of what he's teaching, and they say they become, they select a peace council. Now the peace council travels with the Peacemaker when he goes to a new nation. But after the Mohawks did this, he called for Jigonsaseh. Now it is said that Hiawatha's dead daughter, the one that was killed during the soccer team thing, that she would come to Jigonsaseh and give her the messages of the Peacemaker and Hiawatha.
Oh, wow.
And so when she got the message to come, she came, but she didn't come by herself. She loaded up her clansmen and their boats with their food and furs and clothing and everything that she thought that the Mohawks were going to need, because she understood that they'd been enclosed in their stockaded villages and they didn't have anything. They were starving. And so down from the river came this procession of Jigonsaseh with all these goods. And as she came into the village, and they started to unload all the food and all the things that these people needed, there was the situation that there was so many hearts that were broken, so many hearts that were tortured from the years of war, from the loss of their loved ones, from the loss of their fathers, their sons, their grandsons, their uncles, their brothers. And so it was Jigonsaseh's task with her women to take these women and to give them unconditional love and to help them heal the wounds that they had. Now, the next tribe that was brought into the Confederacy was the Oneida. And here again, Jigonsaseh came with her women and her men in their boats with all their supplies. And they came with the contingency of the Mohawk Peace Group. But when they came and the Oneidas saw the Mohawks, you have to remember, many, many years, generations of war had gone on between these two. And as the Mohawk women and men came into the village enclosure, the Oneidas immediately took offense for that person killed my son, that person killed my husband, that person, that person, that person. And so this is when it really kicked in, because now the Mohawk had to take what they had been taught and share it and give it to the Oneida, to love them unconditionally, regardless of who did what and what had happened in the past and who had hurts and who had pains and who still had open wounds and remembrances. And so this was basically the work that Jigonsaseh and her women, which eventually would encompass all 5 nations, had at that time, was to heal the people and to bring this unconditional love back to the people. I think it's a powerful story.
Mhm,
Incredible.
mhm.
And
One part that I might share with
want-
you that kind of goes along with this. No, does somebody have a question?
well, I wanted to say something you said in your book that I loved was that the peacemaker would never start some official meeting until Jigonsaseh had arrived.
Yes, yes. Well, there were times they needed to get together just to talk and have discussions among themselves. And this is true. He would have somebody watch for her, and he would pace up and down, and nothing would begin until she finally arrived and they knew that she was safe.
And it's so funny because I heard someone else interpret that as, Jigonsaseh made them wait. And it's like, no, she was gathering all this stuff. She had to travel, wait for the time to come and bring the women and bring all the food and the supplies. It's not like she was trying to hold anything up.
No, no, not at all. I never got that sense. I
No.
got the absolute divine feminine in her and the absolute divine masculine in the peacemaker.
Yeah.
That these two people had absolutely no ego whatsoever, and everything was about helping the people and bringing forth the peace. Hiawatha got there in the beginning of the story. And of course, that depends on the tribal tradition, which you guys mentioned at the first, because they do have different tribal stories about that. In one of them, though, he is considered to be the cannibal. And so he's got to heal his mind. He's got to heal his heart from the wounds of losing all of his family. And who did that to him? But the Tadadaho, the Anadaro, he's the one who killed his family and all of his daughters. And yet, what is the one task that they give to Hiawatha in all of this bringing together the tribes? And it's to convert the Tadadaho to this way of peace.
Mhm.
So here's Hiawatha, and the last thing he wants to do is like this guy, let alone love him. He'd rather just kill him. But instead, he's got to go to the Tadadaho and he's got to convince him of this path of peace. And there's only one way to do that. He has to be peace himself. He has to be the peace. He's got to represent it. He's got to be it. And so Hiawatha spends a great deal of time thinking about Onodaro. Now, both of them grew up in the same village, so he knew Onodaro from the time he was little. And as he contemplates this, he thinks about how the boys, him included, who had taunted him and teased him because he didn't have any parents, he was misshapen from birth, and they would tease him and taunt him. And he began to realize that Onodaro never had a friend, never had anyone who actually cared about him or loved him. And so this helped Hiawatha shift his thinking and his feelings and determine that he's going to become that one friend to Onodaro. Now, Onodaro, in the meantime, he'd heard about all these stories because, you know, his warriors went out in the woods, and while they were hunting, they'd go near these other villages. And while they're looking at these villages, they're listening to him laugh. He can smell the roasting of meat and roasting of corn. These warriors can hear all this stuff that's going on in the village. And they take it back to Onodaro and tell him about it. And Onodaro is saying, what? What's happening out there? What kind of a spell? What kind of magic are they using on these people? They're supposed to be afraid of me. I'm the big bad guy. And so Onodaro decides that he's got to know whether the stories his warriors are telling him is true. So one morning he steals away and he hides in the bushes near a Mohawk village. And as the sun comes up, he sees the men come out. They're laughing, they're telling jokes. The women are singing songs, they're working together, the fields are growing. Men are making new longhouses. Perhaps one is teaching a hawk to fly. It's just, he looks at this and he can feel the love, the camaraderie. And all of a sudden, he's feeling very alone. He's feeling like he has never, ever known that. He's never had that in his whole life. And now within his own being, he wants it. He wants it. So after all the times that Hiawatha goes to visit with him and talk to him and share the message of the good mind, Onodaro is finally ready to really hear and to really listen. So the next time when Hiawatha comes, Onodaro welcomes him. There's no longer all the sarcastic remarks and little digs that have been going on from his warriors. But Hiawatha is welcomed and heralded in. And Onodaro says, I will do this great peace. Now, of course, in the very end of the story, they bring him into the circle where everybody's gathered. Onodaro looks around and he sees every enemy he's got gathered there. And he says, Hiawatha lied to me, they're going to kill me. And instead, everyone circles around him and they sing the song of peace. And there is such an outpouring of love from everyone that right there before their eyes, Onodaro's shape shifts, it changes, and he looks like other men, no longer crooked, no longer bent, misshapen, but as straight as any man. With all the tangled thoughts that he had totally cleared. So even in this way, you see, it wasn't just Jigonsaseh or just the peacemaker that healed him. It took everybody together. But with that energy, with that power, that united energy, they performed a miracle that no one, absolutely no one thought was possible. And so Jigonsaseh was the one who placed the horn on his heads and the 50 other sets of horns for the other sachems. And she combed his hair, got him dressed, made his clothes presentable for what you might call the coronation, for the final gesture of Tadadaho becoming the speaker of the people.
Mm.
So there are some definite differences in this story from the other stories
Mhm.
Yeah. Wow.
that are out there.
Yeah.
Seneca Cayugas. Any questions? You guys want to go back to something else and talk about it, or?
Can I say I was just realizing that the story you were telling was how they all worked together was just like the way you explained the creation happened. Wasn't just one, it was like they were reliving that creation story.
Yes. Now, one of the things I did learn through all of this, because later on, after I left Oklahoma, I met Blue Thunder. Blue Thunder was the Paiute Shoshone, Eastern Shoshone medicine man. In fact, he was a premier earth healer. Blue Thunder, as a child growing up, had played with the big feet and the little people and was very clairvoyant along those lines. But as he got older and got to be a teenager and so forth, he got into the thing that so many of our young people do, drugs and trouble and so forth. But he did manage to make it into the university. And he had tried several times to commit suicide. Life just was not worth living. He didn't know what he was here for. And so there was one time that he took so much cocaine, it could have killed a dozen people. But he's recounted that as he sat there on the floor, a thunder being appeared within the room and it picked him up and shook him. And he's thinking, boy, this is some trip. I really am having a good trip this time. It wasn't until later that he realized that the thunder being had shook that cocaine out of him and had saved his life. Now the thunder being told him, we've got a purpose for you. We've got something we want you to do. And Blue Thunder says, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to finish my school. But he went to school, and I don't know how many of you have experienced this. I have. But the ancestors made so much freaking noise that he couldn't hear the professors. And so he ended up flunking out of school anyway. So he finally said, okay, I'll go do what you tell me to do. So they took him all over the country and taught him to interpret the petroglyphs. Now, right up here, we have a place called Celebration Park, and it is filled with Shoshone and Paiute petroglyphs. And he learned how to read those. But what those are the ceremonies for healing the earth, for returning the earth back to its pristine condition.
Wow.
And so I got a chance to meet him and work with him for about 13 years.
Wow.
And now I've told you all that, and I forgot why I even brought him up.
It's a good story anyway.
It is.
You learned a lot,
Yeah.
it sounds like, about
Yeah.
living the earth.
Oh, this is what it was. Okay, this is when I put this little piece together. While I was in New York, I realized that the Peacemaker, while he was there, he implanted peace in the very ground of New York. That whole area up there has peace as part of its DNA.
Huh.
And so through the ceremonies, we clear off all the stuff that the foreigners have overlaid on it, all the stuff the Anunnaki overlaid over it, everything that has been laid over that piece is cleared off so that the piece can come up and blossom and bloom and spread clear across the nation and the world.
Whereabouts? Oh,
Any place in New York.
wow.
Yeah, the Peacemaker implanted peace in the DNA of the earth, in the plants, in the water. but it's been kind of shoved to the background because the other peoples came in with their thoughts. It's kind of like the story Jamie Sams tells in the very beginning, the creation story of the Field of Plenty, where she talks about in the beginning, the Creator made absolutely everything that we needed, and he placed it in this field of plenty. And the way we bring it forth is to have a grateful heart and to give thanks for everything that Creator has come. And that way he says, thank you, thank you, thank you. And he says more, more, more. And so we have more of it. But when the Europeans came and the Haudenosaunee took this belief to them, they came from a civilization of lack, of debtor's prison, where there was never enough. And so they brought that thought form over here. And there was so many of them that came that brought this thought form that they eventually overlaid the Haudenosaunee teachings so that the teachings no longer function. And so the way for us to get them to function again is to clear off the negativity that's in our area and open it back up so that the peace and everything can once again be here. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Right.
thank you.
And you're such an amazing storyteller. Like we just went right in there with you.
Well, I'm glad, because as you can tell, this story, I have lived it for 20 years, you know, the paintings, writing it down, and it is such a part of me. It's just, yeah.
Do you feel perhaps, is there any prophecy that the Jigonsaseh energy will come again into somebody, or do you feel connected to that energy?
You have the book, dear. You have the book.
I do.
Yes.
Yes.
And the very last story, the Peacemaker's prophecy.
Oh, I probably didn't read the whole thing because I was focusing on Jigonsaseh.
Well, it doesn't say that, but it does say that
Okay.
there will be that during the time of the not the Civil War, World War II, the two dragons are fighting. The red dragon and the white dragon are fighting. And the red dragon pulls the hair from the white dragon. And the black dragon has emerged, and he catches that hair in his hands. And that white hair turns into a white woman. And this white woman begins to tell the black serpent and all the people these stories. And they know these things, they know these truths, but they've forgotten them. And so through her stories, they remember the truth of everything, the truth of the Haudenosaunee stories. And it's supposed to be, now she's supposed to surface at the same time that a young boy surfaces. There's a young boy that is supposed to lead the people. And he's supposed to surface about the same time. And I don't know. I know that 20 years ago, I met a young boy, but he's not a boy anymore. So I'm not really sure how that prophecy, you know, will, it's just like the young South American boy that sued the countries for the environment. He got the group together to do all that, and he was leading a contingency of young people to save our earth. He's not a boy anymore either. So I don't know if if it means literally a boy is what I'm getting to.
Well, he could start as a boy and become a man and learn along the way, or I don't know.
Yes, yes, yes.
Wow.
So did Jigonsaseh ever travel up this way to this part of Lake Ontario, do you think?
Not as I don't know. I mean, it's possible, and it's just not recorded anywhere. The indication was that she just traveled to the 5 nations.
Right.
But I know too from some of the things that I've seen is that word spread about what the Peacemaker in Hiawatha and Jigonsaseh was doing. And people traveled from all over to hear what was going on.
Right.
The Five Nations adopted many of the people that wanted to be part of the Confederacy, took them in, made them part of their nation so that they could be under it. But there were many nations that said, no, we don't want this. And yet this was done at an early enough time that I think if you look at all woodland nations, they all have the same customs. They all have the same traditions. There is a story on Blue Thunder's site written by Dane Larson, who was a Cherokee elder. And he talks about the pale one who came, who had this aura of light around him that people could see. And the teachings that he gave to the Cherokee. So the Cherokee got this, and I think probably every nation did. I think it's since that time that we've had so many different nations splinter off from the Haudenosaunee or from each other, because, you know, as an area became overpopulated, a group would decide to go create a new village or something and end up being a different clan or a different nation even. But I think that in the beginning, just by looking at the traditions of all the different woodland peoples, that they all were part of this great law and of these traditions, because they seem to have traces of it even today yet.
Well, yes, because it was what, about 1,000 years ago, you think that they came, or do you have any?
Dane Larson puts it about 100 years before the Haudenosaunee. The Haudenosaunee at this time have got archaeological findings that places it probably around the year 909. And then Dane has it about 100 years earlier.
Right.
But the archaeological findings is a village that doesn't have a stockade. So the absence of a stockade means they were living in peaceful times. They didn't need the stockade for protection.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think you said that there's some astrological
Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, I was going there and forgot. Yes, in the final chapter of forming the Confederacy, they go to the Seneca, and the Seneca have got some very powerful war chiefs, and these war chiefs don't want to join the Confederacy because they're not peace chiefs, they're war chiefs, and they don't want to give that up. They like their power, they like their position. And so here we are, we're at the very last shred of forming this Confederacy, and they can't get it done because of these Seneca war chiefs. So the Peacemaker turns to them and tells them, all right, people, this is your first challenge as the Confederacy. What are you going to do? How are you going to resolve this? And so they talked about it, and it was finally resolved that the Five Nations were going to need protection from the other tribes that were around. So they designated these two Seneca war chiefs to be the war chiefs for the entire Confederacy. Well, this was a good start, but you know, the Senecas still are hard-headed. They still don't want to join. And so the Peacemaker tells them about an eclipse that's going to happen. And so this eclipse happens, the sun goes behind the moon, and it's darkness, total darkness. Now, this is like the final thing. I mean, this converts them all.
Always get them with an eclipse. Okay.
You bet, you bet. And so now they all join the Confederacy.
Okay.
and so that eclipse is how you can time date
Okay.
this.
Yes.
Okay.
So
it was a solar eclipse?
Yes, solar eclipse. And so the date that they found astrologically that on, I believe it's August 9th, maybe it's the 18th. I know it's in the book, but one of those dates, they found that there was an eclipse that would have happened over Seneca territory in 909.
Wow.
So they've been able to take it back that far.
Okay. So that's really interesting because there is going to be a solar eclipse next week in Gemini, and I've been doing these astrology moon workshops, and it's about the twins, right? So I've been
Yes.
wanting to talk about the twins. Now, of course, you're mentioning the female twins, and I'm going, why do all these myths always have only boy twins? In every culture, everywhere, it's always the feuding boy twins because it's, you know, that constellation. But it's really interesting to find out about the female twins. So I feel like, oh my God, that's really valuable information. So thank you so much. And also, I think Cortez or somebody, it was also that hit him with an eclipse was one of the ways that they convinced, indigenous people that they were gods because they predicted the eclipse coming, right?
That could
Yeah.
be. One of the interesting things talking about constellations is over Niagara Falls and Onondaga, that area of New York, in the winter months, is the constellation Lynx directly over during the winter.
Right.
And like you mentioned, underneath Lynx is Gemini, the twins, directly underneath Lynx. Now, I realize Lynx got her name from some European, but perhaps it's very synchronistic anyway.
Yeah, so I think, Maureen, you have a book about the constellations, and I've heard different stories, you know, about this, but of course they all use the stars. They all looked at the stars, you know what I mean?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I know that Native Americans had different names for them, and I have no idea what they may have called the Lynx constellation.
Okay.
But that constellation is over her birthplace. Many different, Eli Parker mentions that there are at least 14 nations that honor Jigonsaseh, that recognize her birth as the last living descendant of Sky Woman. And he actually named them in his book. But all of these nations claimed her. And so in each one of the nations, you will find stories that she was born to their nation. And so it becomes really, really difficult to say, well, this is where she was born, or that is where she was born. I do know that up there around Niagara, they claim her birth. They think that she was born there. They also think the Sky Woman landed there. And so local lore sometimes has got some very interesting information. Something else I might share is there's an Onondaga woman. She never learned English, but she did extensive writing. Let me see if I can, her name's not coming to me right offhand. But anyway, one of the names of Jigonsaseh was the Fire Queen, the Fire Queen. And that you can find reference to in just about any story about her. But this lady from Onondaga writes she held the peace pipe for the nations. She held the peace pipe for the nations. That is why she was the Fire Queen.
So
Now, I don't know. I know years ago, I was told women don't hold the pipe. Women don't hold the pipe. They can't hold the pipe. But since then, having found that Jigonsaseh was actually the one who had the pipe of peace for the nations, I also found a very intriguing story from 1935. It was published by a tobacco shop. But it is the story of the Lakota. And it tells of a time when there was a great flood, and this great flood was covering the earth everywhere. And the people had gone to the top of a great mountain, but the water was coming up, and it was coming higher and higher and higher. And just at the last moment, an eagle swept down and pulled a woman from the throng and took her to an even higher mountain. Once he took her to the higher mountain, he pecked out of the mountain stone a pipe, and he gave it to her. Now, after the waters receded, where the people had been standing was now a red stone, which we call kaolinite. That red stone represents the blood of the people. And the Creator put 2 women over this spot to be guardians of it and to keep it safe. So there's some little women's stories for you.
Well,
Thank
but-
you.
thank you. Well, you know, it's very much like the flood in Noah, of course, only they use the symbol of the dove for peace,
Yes.
which is Venus. So
Yeah.
it's all related to the goddess. If you know about the history of the symbols, Venus's symbol is always a dove, copper, you know, the 5-pointed pentagram. So all of these symbols are the same. They've just been interpreted in different ways.
Yes.
Right? The flood
Yeah.
is always acknowledged, and also, again, every culture all over the world
Yes.
records a flood. So there was an actual flood, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, even the Nez Perce, the Nimipu here in Idaho, when I was fortunate to sit and talk with them, they told me that when the flood came here,
Mhm.
that they were told 3 times to go to, oh, it's in Hell's Canyon. It's the tallest mountain in Hell's Canyon.
In what state
Anyway.
is that?
Nimipu, Nez Perce.
Okay, no, what area? I don't know the
Oh,
state. In the,
Hell's Canyon. It's a great big canyon that we have up here that the Snake River travels through to get to
okay.
Columbia. It's a
okay.
big tourist attraction. But the Nez Perce was told to go there,
Mhm.
and they had 3 times. And by the 3rd time, anyone who was not on this mountain was swept away by the water.
Okay. Mm.
So he shared that much of the story with
Right.
me.
Well,
So
So
one
yeah, all over.
Are you
question.
researching new stories in this new area that you live in? Or what are you doing these days? You did so much with all of this work.
Well, I do have some projects in the works. Things are getting kind of stymied a little bit. I feel like I'm kind of being shelved